Good morning, everyone. Again, welcome to worship. Welcome to those joining us on our Facebook live stream. We're glad you're joining in with us in worship today. Did you notice there was a spelling difference between Emmanuel in the reading that Dominic had for us and Emmanuel in the lyrics from our first song, O Come, Emmanuel? Anybody know why that is? Typo word, pick it up. One Emmanuel is Greek, the Greek spelling, and one is the Latin spelling. Wars of the father stuff like this. I think Emmanuel I is Greek, and Emmanuel E is Latin. No, it's the other way around. Well, it doesn't matter, but know that they mean the same thing, they're just spelled differently. And it's kind of a weird thing that we do sometimes when we work with language. Did you know that Jesus isn't Jesus' name? That's not his name. Jesus is the English version of the Greek form of the Hebrew name. Can we make it more complicated? Of the Hebrew, probably, yeah, no doubt. We can change the spelling, I suppose. Of the Hebrew name Yeshua. Yeshua is the name that Jesus would have gone by. We call him Jesus because we have to change things along the way as we go. We should be singing Shine Yeshua Shine instead of Shine Jesus Shine. But we don't. Names matter. Names matter. And it's important that we recognize these kind of things. I mention it because of the prophetic reference that Isaiah makes, or rather that Matthew makes in verse 22 in today's reading. Matthew is referring to the Isaiah prophecy about a woman who will be having a baby. He will be the Savior, and he will be known as Emmanuel. And no matter how you spell it, that means God is with us. Isaiah was talking to people getting ready to be run over and taken into exile. Happens a lot to those guys, doesn't it? There's few things more hopeful in life than the assurance that God will be with us. And they needed that assurance in a big way. That's why I like the narrative lectionary. There's several reasons that I like the narrative lectionary, but we get an arc of the feeling of how this goes. The lectionary is the list of readings we use Sunday by Sunday by Sunday. And there's an arc of the story that goes and lets us know some good things. And we've had a lot of references to the exile in this series of the narrative lectionary. We've heard about that exile business a lot. And it is important to understand the exile and the effect it had on the people because it comes back to manifest itself in how Matthew writes the story of Christ's birth. And it's all about people in need of a hope. The Hebrew people are about to be run over again. It's been happening for a couple hundred years, but a couple of different dynasties have come and taken them over. And it makes this story of hope all the more poignant. We're not talking about a celebrity here. We're not talking about a sports figure that has done something very cool. We're talking about an entire people who are uprooted from their lives and taken away to a foreign country. Things have become very different. They've experienced some of the worst things that could happen to them, and they hear the words Emmanuel. God is with us. This morning's reading is a reminder to us, hearing about a people in need of hope. The author of the Gospel of Matthew was writing to a largely Jewish audience shortly after their temple had been destroyed for the second time. Now, the temple in Jerusalem is not what we think of as a synagogue. It's not what we think of as a church. It's not the place of worship. It serves that function too, but it's not the place of worship where the rabbi, or in our case, the pastor, has his office down the hall. And we hang out, we come, we sing songs, and we go home. The temple in that time period for those people is where God literally lived. God's presence was found inside the temple in this kind of curtained off, walled off area toward the back called the Holy of Holies. God, that's where God was to be found, literally. The Holy of Holies was called that because only one person, the high priest, could enter the Holy of Holies, and he could do it only once per year. Anybody else that messed around that got smited and went up in a puff of smoke. God literally lived there. God was so holy that humans could not approach. The temple was destroyed the first time by those Babylonians, as they came into Jerusalem to cart off all the people into exile. That's why it's important we know this exile story. That's what's going on here. The house of God has been destroyed and the people dispersed to other lands. All the while they are hearing Isaiah's prophecy. Emmanuel. God is with us. When they finally returned to Jerusalem after being released from exile, the people managed to rebuild the temple, and things go along reasonably well for about 400 years. And then the Romans show up. The Romans are not nice masters. They are not a nice occupying force. We know this from the stories we hear during Holy Week. That's where we normally associate a lot of the Roman history with the Jewish people. That's when we hear about the atrocities the Romans commit against the Jewish people. Like crucifying Jesus unnecessarily. That's when we hear about it. But the Romans, through a couple hundred years, were not nice people. They were tyrants. They were overlords. And they did not take well to anybody who disagreed with them. It's not a good way to live necessarily. And after a couple hundred years, the people get fed up and they rise up in revolt. They rise up in rebellion. The Romans aren't going to put up with that in any way, shape, or form. And they crush this rebellion in no uncertain terms. Part of which is to destroy the rebuilt temple once again. And this time, the temple stays destroyed. Which begs a couple of questions. What does this mean for people of God? If the house of God, if the place where God literally exists, if that place is gone, if that place is destroyed on a permanent, ongoing basis, where's God? Where is God? The answer, stretching out over this period of 6 centuries or so, is simply this: Emmanuel. God with us. That is where people of faith found their strength. That is where people of faith found their hope. They could always lean into their faith and the promise that they had heard from the prophet Isaiah. Emmanuel. God is with us. When they were uprooted and taken from their homes, Emmanuel, God is with us. When their central place of worship, the house of God, the place where God lives, is destroyed, Emmanuel, God with us. In all those trials and tribulations over the centuries, Emmanuel, God is with us. God has been with them in a spiritual sense. And now we hear about the promise of a Savior who will be born to Mary and Joseph. We hear about the promise of how God is joining us in human form. God is incarnating into human form and joins us in a very real presence. We hear for the first time about the real presence of God. Emmanuel, God is with us. As we come to the communion table, you've heard me say that before. Emmanuel, God is with us, real presence. In those times of challenge, Emmanuel, God is present. God is with us. As we sit in the ER waiting for test results, Emmanuel, God is with us. In those times of heartbreak at the loss of a loved one, Emmanuel, God is with us. As we see the empty chair at the table this holiday season for the first time, Emmanuel, God is with us. Emmanuel. Thanks be to God. Amen. invite you to please stand as you are comfortable and able to continue our worship and song.